All right, welcome to Navigate with Tim Austin, a podcast designed to help leaders like yourself take some of the guesswork out of transition. And I'm Tim Austin, the host of this show and founding coach of Encompass Life Coaching. And get ready today to be inspired and encouraged because I have in the room with me, the virtual room, so to speak, Annie Perdue-Olson as the guest of our show. And I recently met Annie by way of a mutual friend, and we decided that we might have something to share on each other's podcasts. So this is the beginning of that journey together. And Annie is the founder of Leading Better Together, working with leaders to navigate the complexities in relationships and cultivate healthy teams through strategic conversations. She's also host of Lead Your Leaders, a podcast to get the team you've always wanted, where she and her guests answer questions submitted by leaders and listeners. She leverages over 20 years of ministry and nonprofit experience as she guides leaders through the people challenges that sidetrack ministry. And she holds a Master of Arts in Human Resources and Change Leadership, is a certified leadership coach and certified Myers Briggs Type Indicator practitioner. So welcome, Annie, to the show.
I'm excited to be here, Tim. This is a great start to a wonderful journey.
Yes, I would agree with that. So let's just start off. Share with our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, your work. I'd just love to start off with that.
Yeah. I was on a podcast a while back, and it was interesting because, of course, they're going to ask this same kind of a question. And as I was going through my resume, so to speak, of my history, it sounded pretty linear. Like, you know what? I started and did business management in mental health clinics. And then I really had the opportunity to step into ministry. And I served on pastoral staff at a large church here in the Twin Cities for 13 years. And then I went back and got my master's degree and then moved into consulting. And it all sounds like it flows really well. But Tim, you and I both know that life doesn't work like that.
Right.
And when you really look at like what I've come to be able to do in working with people and navigating relationships and navigating the complexities of change, it really comes from what's in between the lines of that resume. It comes from all of the life circumstances that intersected with those professional experiences and those ministry experiences. And so I know we'll dive into more of this as we're talking through today, but really it's the spaces in between where I learned what I needed to learn to be able to do what I do today. And I work with leaders a lot on the challenges of ministry, and it's because I've experienced the challenges of life and leadership along the way. When I was serving on staff at the church, my husband was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and had a stem cell transplant. And then after a year and a half, he went home to be with the Lord. And I was still serving in leadership at the time. 3 years later, I was married to a man who was 42 years old at the time and had never been married. And he went from being single to married with 2 children, like in just a short period of time. And then later on in life, we were surprised with what my husband and I like to call our retirement baby. Late in life, we added another child into our story. And it's those transitions and in those spaces that I really feel like I learned the most to be able to do what I do today. I've got credentials, but it's really those spaces that have taught me what I need to know.
Wow. Yeah. And those kinds of experiences, like you said, the in between the lines experiences, those are hard to put on a resume, right? Those are
Right.
not something you just, like you said, that linear piece is it doesn't always show up there. It shows up in the messiness. It shows up in your case, the grief and the loss, and all those struggles and highs and lows. And so, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more that, and sometimes I'm wondering, Annie, if it's the same with you, maybe it's just me, but sometimes there's that little voice that says, you're not really qualified.
Right.
Because these experiences are hard to, or I don't necessarily want to put them on paper or on a resume. I have no need to. But if I was, actually applying for a role or a job somewhere, that would be tricky. And I could see myself struggling with that.
It's interesting because I find that it's really in those spaces that I've learned the most but they're the hardest ones to articulate. And in some ways, maybe because of that, like maybe I'm not feeling always as qualified to do maybe whatever it is that I'm facing in the moment. We rely on those linear resume building stuff,
right,
to be able to articulate like here's what I can offer. Here's what I can
right.
do. But really what I offer to the people around me is what happened in those spaces in between. That's really what I bring to the table. I bring to the table the compassion that you learn in times of grief. You bring empathy. You bring insight into the messiness and how to navigate that messiness. You bring insight into those transitional spaces when everything feels so complex that you don't actually know the pathway forward, or it doesn't feel secure, or doesn't feel known. You're walking into that space of the unknown and it's all messy. It's my life experiences that really help me partner the best that I can with my clients that I have today, because life is messy and leadership is messy. And we know that.
For sure. Yeah. Good word. Yeah. And so speaking of the messiness, what's in transition, what's one role, a rug pulled out or a forced transition, something you didn't see coming? And I think you've already alluded to it, but maybe unpack that a little bit more for our listeners.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I've had several experiences where I would classify them as the rug pulled out from under me kinds of things in my life. The one that caught me the most off guard or caught me by surprise the most is actually the birth of my daughter 10 years ago. I had just launched my business by just a couple of months when my husband and I found out that I was pregnant with her. And it took me a matter of hours before I was like, I'm all in. If it took me a couple hours to get over the shock, then after that, I was like, I am all in for this. And I actually, since I was 18 years old, I've worked full time and spent most of those years in ministry, which is really hard work. You give a lot of yourself in ministry. It's usually not a 9-to-5 kind of a job. And so I raised my first 2 kids while working full time and doing ministry, and as a single mom for 3 years of that time as well. And so as the pregnancy progressed, I was like, I'm going to stay home. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom for the first time in my life at 42 years old. And it was a big decision. And I think maybe it's just me, Tim, but when I see the future, I have this like idealistic perspective of how amazing and wonderful it's going to be. But it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. She was early. She had a lot of health issues because she was only 4 pounds, 5 ounces when she was born. The first 3 months was really, really difficult for her and then for me. But what was the rug pulled out from under me part of it that caught me off guard was how much I did not realize that who I was, my identity was wrapped up in what I do. I'd done ministry for so many years. I felt like that was meaningful work, that I was contributing to something meaningful. And then all of a sudden, here I was, this stay-at-home mom, changing diapers and taking care of a child who needed a lot of extra attention.
Yeah.
And at that identity, that tearing apart of purpose, and having that feel like it went away, was gone, that I had no sense of purpose, was surprised me. I didn't think I was as wrapped up in my career as I was.
Did you put, 18 years of full-time ministry and being a mom, and then this was your third child that came in to the picture. Okay. Yeah. So all those years and then you decided to put a pause on your business, which you were just starting up. Did you put a complete stop on that, or were you still trying to juggle some of the business piece and being a stay-at-home mom?
For the first year, I pretty much put a full pause on it. If somebody was already a client, I would continue caring for the clients that I had at the time, but I did no active pursuit of any new clients whatsoever in that first year. And then after that, I sprinkled in a couple of different things that I did here or there as projects, but I ended up waiting until she was in first grade before I relaunched my business.
Okay. Yeah. So that was a fairly long season of a total shift for you
Yes.
in terms of, yeah. So I can see, when you mentioned identity and purpose being wrapped up in who you were in that long past season. So, and that was kind of what I wanted to ask you about. Calling can feel so connected, almost inseparable at times to purpose and identity. So our vocation and our calling, we equate with purpose and identity. And I know I did myself when, after following 20 years of overseas life,
Right.
and as a global worker, as a missionary, doing lots of different roles, but really, yeah, I built an identity and a purpose around that long season of life and ministry, and then coming back to 6 years ago, back to the USA, and shifting not out of a ministry focus, but into a business model for coaching,
Right.
and having some time there, kind of in between of pastoring while I was building up my coaching business as well. So I was kind of juggling two things. And then I dived into just full-time coaching. But I wrestled a lot with what you're talking about, that identity, purpose. And sometimes I've wondered if it's more of a struggle with men, but maybe not. Maybe that's a false assumption. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think it possibly could be more of a struggle with men. I think maybe for me, my personality is a little bit more of a career minded. I've always been really interested in having a career. So I think that maybe it's that mindedness is like the purposefulness around providing, caring, whatever that looks like. Maybe then that identity gets maybe linked to that career motivation. And when that link happens, maybe that's where we get ourselves into trouble.
Yeah. Good insight there. Yeah. I think that is very much what I've seen as well. And my wife is very much career minded too.
Yeah.
Gosh, if we were to have a child now, that would be,
right.
that would be, impossible, but anyways,
right.
it would be an interesting
It
shift.
would shake your world.
Plus, yeah, we've been empty nesters for now going on a year and a half or so. So that's we've gotten used to this new life. We're getting used to, or still adjusting, but getting used to it.
Yeah.
So okay, so the struggle with purpose and identity through that shift for you. How did you wrestle with those areas, purpose and identity, through the transition? Maybe what understandings, what insights did you take away from that?
It's a really good question, because I would say that it was really that first year after Briella was born was probably what I would consider maybe a more of a dark, difficult, discouraging time of my life, because I think what I had to do in that first year is just wrestle with the grief. And I don't think that we always give ourselves space to do that. I think I didn't have a choice to give myself space to do that, because I was home with this little girl who needed a lot of extra attention. And it was me, I was the one there doing that and providing for her. And so it really put me in the place where I had to wrestle with the grief. I couldn't just pick up another job or go after another pursuit of career. I actually had to face the fact that my idea of what was meaningful and what was purposeful was not what I was experiencing at the moment. And I think it really took a year for the Lord to really extract maybe some of that from my heart. And I think that was a grieving process that was part of that transition for me. And I think also it was a very spiritual process. I spent a lot of time talking to the Lord in that first year. And I remember coming out of the end of that year, and I was praying and I was asking the Lord, what is it that that you have for me. I really want something that's purposeful, but in line with what I've been learning over this last year and through this transition and this letting go and this grieving process. And as I was journaling, goals for the upcoming year and maybe what I wanted to accomplish, I just felt like the Lord just drop in my heart, Annie, I need you to just be the best friend that you can be. And I felt like it was a whole new calling that he had put on my life that is separate from career. My calling is not ministry. My calling is not pastoring. My calling is not training and facilitating or coaching or any of the things that maybe I thought my calling was, but my calling was just to be the very best friend that I could be. So I just journaled and I wrote down, okay, so like, what does that look like for me to be the very best friend? And I spent that next year while I was raising Briella and taking care of her and being a stay-at-home mom, trying to figure out what it meant to be the best friend that I could be. And so one of the things that I did that was really, I had a membership at the YMCA here locally, and anytime and every time I could get a guest pass, I would get a guest pass. And with every guest pass, you got 2 hours of free childcare for someone that you would bring along with you. So I was a part of a mom's group at the time, and all these young moms with young children, and they're stressed out and not getting a break. And so I started bringing them along with me to the Y, and they could get 2 hours of free childcare, and we would walk and talk or work out. And it was just this space. I was creating this space to just really give them this gift of time, a gift of time for themselves that they didn't have. And so I got to the point where I actually at one point had over 30 guest passes. And I actually did a small group for the summer of moms for like a 6-week group at the Y, bringing all these moms and their kids in. And we did a book study together. And it was just really this opportunity in this space for me to learn what it was like to just be a friend. And I feel like that changed the trajectory of everything that I do today. You can't be best friends with everyone. It's not about that, but it's what does friendship look like in this relationship? So where we're at today, what does being the best friend that I can be look like? And so I even do that with my clients. And with part of that is just really being responsive to their needs. And so when they have a need, I have empathy for that. And I tend to be really responsive. It's actually one of my core values. I put it on my website. Responsiveness is really something that's really important. Now, that doesn't mean I'm at beck and call. I'm not going to take a call at 3 a.m. from one of my clients, but it does mean when they have a need, I'm going to respond to that. In the pandemic, when things were falling apart and all these ministries were trying to figure out how to shift things really rapidly and try and make things happen for the people that they served, I just reached out and I said, hey, if you're a monthly coaching client, you can have unlimited coaching sessions for the next 2 months as I help you navigate the transition that you're going through. It was a gift that I could give, a way that I could honor what they were going through as a friend.
That's good. So I'm hearing you say that in your case, and I'm wondering if that's really what the Lord wants and desires for his children, is to kind of break out of that mindset of my identity, my purpose rests in a job or a title or the numbers or the impact I can make or whatever that might be. It really boils down to relationship, doesn't it? In some
I really
form.
think so. I am so with you on that, Tim. I think that it really boils down. And for me, it looked like, be the best friend that you could be. Yeah. For someone else, it might look different as far as how that gets fleshed out. But I think it boils down to relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So coming out of that season and then entering back into your work and your career, what resources did you discover during that time that might be helpful for our listeners, or while you were navigating that kind of midlife career shift and asking questions around that and dealing with some of the uncertainty around that, all of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. As I think back to that season in my life, there's a couple of resources. I don't know if you'd call them resources, but a couple of things that I leaned into pretty heavily, let's say. One of them is relationships. I did have some close friends, and during that grieving process, I think sometimes we need partners in our grief, people who will understand, that we can lean on. when we're going through that grieving process. So I would say that those friendships were really important. I also think that joining that moms group was probably one of the best decisions I ever made. I joined that group when Briella was probably about 10 months old. And I felt really awkward. It felt awkward because all of the moms in that group were about in their 20s, and here I was in my 40s. And so it was a very awkward thing to get over myself and just go, okay, just don't get a hang up on your age. Go in, dive in, step out, be brave, do this thing. And I joined that moms group. And I think that was a really helpful thing for me as far as a resource. As Briella got older and was in preschool, my husband and I actually took a Bible class together, which was really interesting. I think that was a really great resource because it's an opportunity to learn. I think when you step out of or step back from those kinds of things that it is of our career and the push to do and produce and perform, we get to enter into a new space where we can learn. And so I learn by taking classes. I know some people learn by reading, but whatever it is, that whatever is your source of learning, to be able to step into that space and learn. And my husband and I taking a class together was really, really helpful. I'd gone to Bible college. I was a pastor for a season. My husband is an engineer. He's got his PhD in particle science. So he studies dust, so not the Bible. And so for us to do something like that together, it was really a powerful experience for us. I like to learn. He likes to learn. Us to do that together, put us maybe even on a different playing field when it comes to even spiritual conversations in our marriage. And so I would say that was a resource that was really, really, really powerful in that season as well, learning.
Yeah. So this might be a good time to ask you about a couple things I've heard you say in your podcasts, which we'll be able to point our listeners to as well. But I've heard you say a couple things. One is you were telling a story, because I think this really goes back to relationships, which seems to be a theme in our conversation. You were telling a story. I don't know if it was a client or just a friend, but you can kind of unpack that a little bit. But they said to you, "You listened me into awareness."
Yes.
And boy, that's a big part of relationships. So maybe unpack that a little bit. What was that like?
And I think it does go back to, I always have this mindset that's going on for me is, how can I be the best friend that I can be in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
And that particular story was over lunch with a colleague of mine, also a fellow coach. So someone who really understands the power of questions and the power of listening. And she was processing something that was going on in her life, often, like most of us, an intersection of both professional and personal. And I just simply asked her about it and gave her my full on attention. It's body language. It's leaning in when they're having the conversation or when they're sharing, and it's asking the question at the right time, or maybe rephrasing something that you heard them say that creates an aha moment. And I was just being me. I was just being a friend who listens. And at the end of the conversation, she turns to me and she said, "You just listened me into awareness." And she recaptured kind of what was the essence of the conversation as she rephrased it. And I was like, you got to trademark that, because you listened me into awareness is such a powerful phrase. I mean, you just can't be a better friend than that. You can't be a better boss than that. You can't be a better parent than that. It's just like you listened me into awareness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And then what's happening is that the person on the other end is processing, and through that processing, they're getting clarity. They're getting focus. You're drawing out just by listening that awareness, right? And so I love that. I love that phrase, listen into awareness, because I think transition seasons are such a pivotal place and such a critical place for us to have strategic listening partners in our lives, right?
Ooh,
People
I like
who
that
will
phrase.
hold
I like
space,
that phrase a lot.
hold space for us, and really just be there to allow us to process and to unpack our stories, to debrief. And that's one of the things I've learned in doing transitions coaching is a lot of it is, I call it debriefing coaching, at least at first, when I'll begin a coaching journey with a client who's in a big transition season, because there's so much stuff to unpack there,
Right.
and which gives them clarity and focus for the now, and helps them move forward. So, I just feel like that's such an important piece. It was for me. And I guess I bring that, and it sounds like you bring that very
Yep,
much
for
so
sure.
to your clients and to the people you work with, holding that space for them. The other thing you said in another episode I was listening to, listeners, you gotta listen to Annie's podcast. We'll give you the info here in a little bit. But another phrase you said is holy uselessness, and you got to unpack that a little bit for us, because that was something to me that really resonated with transition seasons, when feel like we're in limbo, when we're in that neutral zone, so to speak, of so kind of unpack, what does that mean, holy uselessness? How'd you come up with that?
Well, I was actually on a retreat weekend with some girlfriends, and it was a magazine that was at the house, and I was reading through the author of the article in the magazine, and she posed a question that was a really powerful question. It totally caught my attention. And the question was, can we afford a moment of holy uselessness? And when I read that question, I went, no, uselessness. No, I don't ever want to be useless. But I spent some time reading the article and then praying and reflecting on that word of uselessness. And it was really this powerful moment of, we were away for 3 days. And so I had been through a really busy season. And I think I'm a high energy, a little bit of an achiever kind of a person. And so being useless just felt wrong. But then as I reflected on it, I think that there's this really powerful space where when we experience a moment of holy uselessness, it's an invitation. Instead of action producing doing, maybe what I would call those Martha moments in our life. If you think of the story of Mary and Martha, and Mary at the feet of Jesus, I think there are Martha moments in our lives where we need to be in the kitchen doing the stuff and producing the things. It makes the world go around. It makes ministry happen. But there's this invitation that we have when we make those useless moments holy. And we can hear the voice of Jesus, and we can step back and we can reflect, and we can invite, I think, the Holy Spirit into those moments in spaces and in ways that we can't when we're really busy. And I think transitions are the ideal time to give ourselves permission to experience and be intentional, maybe even about holy uselessness.
Yeah. I love that phrase, because I think that, a lot of times we get this especially prolonged transition seasons where we're not getting the answers we want. Our expectations aren't being met, whatever that is there that causes some of that uneasiness, which I think is uncertainty.
Yes.
All that uncertainty, but being able to be okay with the uncertainty, to be okay in that space. And so it's really a struggle, even for me as more of a, I'm a 9 on the Enneagram, even for me to be okay with just embracing some of that time, of that in between time, as opportunity to experience some more solitude and silence. And in that space, go through a process of discernment, to be able to actually get clarity. Sometimes we just want to leap to the next thing, jump ahead, right? And get there sooner than later. And yet there's so much growth potential in that space.
And I think what you're talking about with when you're faced with uncertainty, it's an uncomfortable space.
Yeah.
And so when we're uncomfortable, sometimes you want to hijack it, you want to jump over it, you want to go around it, you want to get over it.
Hijack it. Yeah. I like it. Yeah, for sure.
In uncertainty, if we were to instead see it as an invitation to maybe have a change of perspective, or to hear God's voice differently in that moment. And maybe instead of trying to get over it, get through it, hijack it, get around it, instead
Right.
we embrace that uncertainty, that could have an impact.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's why, a lot of people come to me in transition seasons when there's so much uncertainty, thinking at first, well, I'll find a coach who can help me move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And which is true. I want to help people move forward. But in order to move forward, sometimes there's some work to be done in that space of uncertainty and really processing, debriefing, whatever you might want to call that space, to get the clarity you need to move forward. And yeah, so yeah, I love that, embracing that, or that positive spin on that sense of, because the world, everything screams at us, do, right?
Right.
Move. Yeah. So
I think that debriefing you're talking about that is a really important piece to do in that space of uncertainty, to slow down long enough to do the debriefing, to bring some people around you to slow down. I think that there's some power to doing that.
yeah. Well, as we get ready to wrap up here, Annie, and it's been so great having you on the show.
Thanks for
We'll
having
have to do this again.
Yeah.
I think we could sit for a good long time, talking about some of these topics and themes that, there seems to be so much overlap in our work and parallels. So, but since we are getting close to wrapping up here, I'm wondering, what advice would you give to your 20 or 30 something self, if you could, looking back? Just anything that comes to mind.
That's such a good question. You know what? I think that the advice that I would give to her at 20 or 30 years old is, don't look for one mentor, but look for many mentors. That there are different needs that you have as you're growing as a leader, and to identify what those needs are, and then look for the people who do that really well, who can invest in you. So if you need to grow in relationship building skills, then find someone who does relationships really, really well. That you don't need just one mentor, but you can look for multiple mentors in your life. And I think for a long time in my early years, I was looking for that one person who would really invest in me and be my mentor and help me grow. And what I've found is that I probably have about 30 mentors. Someone who taught me how to teach and speak. And I have another mentor that has taught me how to write and gives me lots of good feedback on my writing. And so this community of mentors, let me call them that, is something I wish I would have started earlier in my life, because I think that that's been a really powerful way for me to grow and have a great support network for the messy middle that comes when you're leading.
Great advice. And I have become convinced of the same thing in the area of transition seasons. I always encourage people around me, and I think I wish I would have thought of this during some major transitions in my life. But I always encourage those in transition seasons to build their transition team. Build a support team around them through that transition. So it's not just me as their coach. It could be a counselor, it could be another mentor, it could be a spiritual director, friends that are going to hold space for you, or challenge you or encourage you, so there's so much in that. So I really appreciate that perspective. Don't just look for that one individual, because there's so many facets of transition and so many ways that people can give input into our lives that we need during these times. So great advice, Annie.
Thanks.
I want to close by asking you to tell our listeners how they can learn even more about Annie Perdue-Olson. Where can we direct them? Where would you say they can go to get, learn more about you and your work and what you do and what you offer?
Yeah. Leadingbettertogether.com is my website. You can find my blog and podcast there, which is great because there's lots of fun stuff there. I'm most active probably on Instagram, so you can follow me there at Leading Better Together is the handle. And there's lots of fun content. I do videos and posts and stuff like that give people some great input. And I'm always looking for leaders who have questions to submit questions for the podcast. And I bring on guests and answer some of those questions myself. And that's been a really fun journey. We launched that in January, and that's been really a great journey to create space for leaders to ask some tough questions sometimes.
Yes. Well, and I will put links to those to the podcast and those other areas where you hang out. I'll put links in the show notes so our listeners can find you in the show notes as well and be directed. I just want to say again, thank you, Annie, so much for joining me for this conversation. Appreciate so much what you do in the workplace, who you are as a leader, and how you're encouraging and equipping and resourcing other leaders as well. So thank you, Annie.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm really, really honored to have been here.
Well, you have been listening to Navigate Podcast. I've been your host, Tim Austin. I am head coach at EncompassLifeCoaching.com. And if what we talk about here on this podcast has been encouraging to you, has been resourceful for you, and you'd like to give us a review, we'd love for you to do that. Any review you can give will just help expand our listening audience, get the word out. So please head over and give us a review on your favorite listening platform, and check us out on EncompassLifeCoaching.com, and we'll catch you next time.